Welcome to a series that we're calling Harvesting Legal Knowledge. I'm your host, Jeff Missling, Executive Vice President and CEO from North Dakota Farm Bureau. And this is kind of a collaboration between NDFB and Ohnstad Twichell law firm. So with us today we have Casey Drege and Marshall McCullough. So welcome, gentlemen.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
We've got some great information to share with you, and I'll just turn it over to Marshall to describe kind of what we're going to talk about here today.
Well, Ohnstad Twichell has been in the process of working with farm entities and farm families since 1939, and I personally have been working in the agribusiness with farm families and entities for, we'll just say, over 30 years at this point. So as a firm and personally, we have a lot of experience in this area. I think kind of the farm entity area and agribusiness, we're going to be looking at a variety of entities. What's the appropriate entity maybe for an operation? Or what are the options available to use? We'll touch a little bit just on the estate planning side because we're looking at the entity, is that going to go on for the next generation, future generations. Anything with agribusiness that involves real estate with the rapid appreciation in values over the last years, we need to address some real estate issues and then kind of the corporate and contractor leases issues that go with it. So this series, this video will kind of focus on just the entity side, sort of advantages and disadvantages and some tax issues to look out for, whether you're a sole proprietorship, partnership, a limited partnership, an LLC, or a corporate status. So those are what we're hoping to cover in today's session.
Sounds good, Marshall. So to start it off here, what are some things farmers should be considering in regard to forming a new entity, and why does it matter?
I'll start first. The entity type makes a big difference. One, we're often looking at a type of limited liability, some liability protection. If you're a sole proprietor, all your personal assets would be at risk. So if something happened on the farm and you were sued, you could be chased all the way to personal bankruptcy. So one issue would be the liability protection. We'll see that often if someone has their rolling stock, put the semis over the road vehicles, maybe in a separate LLC, add some liability protection. We're seeing a lot of employee workforce issues, some from foreign countries coming in for harvesting or planting season. We just want to make sure that there's some liability protection whenever you have employees working for you. A second thing to consider when you're looking at it is, are there future generations? Is this an entity that you're hoping to pass on to a son and a daughter, grandson, granddaughter, or is this something that it's really just you and kind of the time you reach retirement stage, you're thinking this would be liquidated? There are a lot of tax consequences that go with liquidating some of the entities, and it would be very difficult to just wind one down in 1 year. Kind of passing it on to future generation. We have issues with the value of farmland. So I know there's another seminar set forth on kind of estate planning side of it, but how are you going to get the value of that farmland? How are you going to control it? Maybe it cannot go all to the one farming heir, but has to be split among the members, and we want to tie that up. We'll also look at gifting over time. If it's something you slowly want to get someone involved, how do you give part of the entity? Well, if it's a corporation or a partnership, you can gift those interests over time. Again, the estate planning, kind of the fairness side, reducing a taxable estate. Even with the larger unified credit amounts, I do have clients that are facing an estate tax problem, so we're trying to get that under control. There's also wanting to tie the land up for the future generation. So how can we do that with some rental agreements or options? And probably the last reason is to raise capital. And I think Casey will get into some of the corporate farming rules, who you can have, but with land where it is, or even where machinery and equipment at the values right now, sometimes you just need to be able to raise some additional funding or some additional capital to help you through some tough periods, and what type of entity you choose can make a difference.
So kind of piggybacking off of what Marshall said, liability is really one of those things we're looking to give farmers, but also just business owners, that protection, that liability protection. So the one kind of unique aspect we see, especially in North Dakota being such, an agriculture business area, is that families are involved often. And that's not always the case with, general businesses or general ownership issues. We don't always have those same issues, but because families are so involved, we do kind of blend over into estate planning issues. And as Marshall brought up, there is another series specifically regarding estate planning issues that come up. The liability protections, again, it depends on kind of the unique circumstances of that family or of that operation. We don't often see partnerships in just general corporate, the general corporate world, but we see it a lot more in the farming world. If you grow sugar beets, you are more than likely going to need to be very intentional about how you set up your operation and specifically to that legal entity side. How are you set up as far as the state goes, as far as how the state views your operation? Another thing we do that is really specific to farming operations is we might need to create multiple entities and kind of stack those on top of each other. The North Dakota legislature has passed specific statutes that relate to farming entities, and we'll get into that a little more as we talk through it. But if you have some outside individuals who are not a part of the family, we might have to get creative and help create a structure that allows for exactly what you're looking for, and if you're looking to include non-family members in whatever operations you're doing. So there's a lot that goes into all of that.
Talking about creating an entity initially, and then dealing with filings and continued compliance after you've created the entity. Can our members go out and create an entity themselves? It sounds like it would be easy, or nowadays with artificial intelligence, maybe the perception is that, it's easy to form an entity like this, but is that the case?
The legal answer is yes, they can. The practical answer is I would be careful about doing that, and specifically AI. It's not there today, but we do run into issues with individuals trying to set up their own entities. And again, when we talk about how the Secretary of State views farming entities, the filing is actually, I don't want to say more difficult, but it does require a lot more information. If we're going to file a simple LLC, it requires some basic information as far as a principal address, registered agent, some very basic information. When we are looking at a farming entity, the Secretary of State is actually going to require those individual members be named, their address, land that is held by the entity. You're going to have to describe that, including the acres, including the county. There's a lot more that goes into that. So the short answer, yes, your members can file, but we're always happy to help with something like that because it can cause a lot of issues. And we've seen issues come up. I recently had a client, he was reaching out to us for a simple contracting issue, and we had followed up. Okay, do you have your entity set up? Yep, I do. Well, when we went back and looked on the Secretary of State's site, he did in fact fill out some forms, but they weren't the correct forms, and he filled out a DBA form, basically a trade name form. So he was left completely exposed to that liability. So that. And it's, to his credit, he was trying to do it. He was filling out the correct information on the form. He had just selected the incorrect form. So, we run into that on occasion, and that's something we want to avoid, something really simple to avoid as well.
I'll put a plug in for Ohnstad Twichell. My wife and I formed multiple LLCs, and we worked through your office here to form those. And it was the nice thing about the one in particular was that you included buyout provisions in that initially, and I'd have never thought to do that because you're thinking, well, we're just forming it. What could possibly go wrong, or what could possibly change? And we utilize those buyout provisions. And so it is handy to have, go through a reputable law firm like Ohnstad Twichell to help get you started down that path. And so just want to mention that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things kind of on my list is really when you're deciding what type of business entity you want, you have to look at the exit strategy as well. We talked about it maybe a little from the estate planning standpoint. Is that going to be passed down? But what if another issue comes up? What if there's a divorce? What if someone passed away prematurely, or maybe you just don't get along anymore? It's easier to address those issues up front when you're getting along than to wait till the problem arises and then not have anything written down. So most of the buy-sell agreements would discuss a transfer during lifetime. Maybe one of the two partners or one of the two shareholders wants to move to Minneapolis. They don't want to be involved anymore. How are you going to buy them out? What are the terms? What are the price? Let's address those up front while everyone's in agreement, not down the road once the issues arise. So the other is when you're looking at the type of entity, again, we talked about, is it for one generation? Maybe a corporation's not the right answer if you're going to do something for one generation. So again, what's that exit strategy down the road? If it's going to pass on for future generations, then maybe the corporation is the right approach. So again, looking at that exit strategy, kind of head off those problems in the future if something comes up. Death, divorce, and disability are the three big ones we like to address there. So others we look at, when you're creating it, artificial intelligence can help you a lot of way through it, but you again have to make the right decisions. As a sole proprietorship, there's really no filing with the Secretary of State, but yet if you want any type of limited liability, that limited liability protection, you have to file through the Secretary of State, okay? So again, whether it's a limited partnership, an LLC, a corporation, all those require that filing with the Secretary of State. And it can make a big difference, like Casey was saying, if you check the wrong box or use the wrong form, you can go from a sole proprietorship tax-free into a partnership, you can go tax-free into an LLC, you can go tax-free into a corporation, or your partnership or your LLC can grow into that corporation. As long as you're going in that direction, sole proprietorship, partnership, LLC, corporation, it's tax-free on formation, but you can't go the other way. If you make a mistake and create a corporation and put your assets into it, and you decide that was a mistake and you want to dissolve that corporation, you just triggered some income tax issues on dissolution of that corporation. And a little later we'll talk about it's not just one layer of tax, it's 2 layers of tax. On dissolution of a corporation, there's double taxation. So you have to be very careful if you pick the wrong entity. There are also timing issues. If you're a corporation, but you've met with your tax advisor and you want to be what's called an S corporation that's taxed differently than a C corporation, you have to file that election within 90 days. If you miss the 90-day window, you're a regular corporation for the rest of that year, and that can really cause issues with your tax planning and any distributions going forward. I had a client, we set up an LLC to hold the rolling stock. Well, you have to transfer title to the vehicles to the new entity within, I believe it was 6 months. If you don't, there's a 5% titling fee. Well, the 5% was a significant dollar amount with several semis and trailers, so we ended up setting up a second LLC so we could avoid the sales tax basically on retitling the vehicle. So you can do things through artificial intelligence, and you can do this yourself, but there are so many issues that without meeting with a legal advisor and actually have your CPA in the same room just to go over all the different options that are available.
Yeah, great points. It makes me think about all the compliance-related challenges that come in the filings that have to be done. But so once you're up and running with this entity, whatever you decide to create, you do have to stay in compliance through annual filings, I believe, and through the Secretary of State's office. So Casey, if you could just walk us through kind of how that works.
Sure. Yep. When you initially file, it's a one-time fee of $135 just to get going. And then each year you'll have to keep up and file again, and I believe that's about $50 to file each year. That's something we see a lot, that people just end up missing that, and that's something we can always help out with, but really that's what your registered agent is for. So we try to be intentional when telling people, pick someone who's going to check the mail and make sure you're filing, because you don't want to fall out of compliance for a variety of reasons, including some of those tax penalties if you fall out. So yeah, there's a lot of filing issues, but not only that, specifically with farming entities, because there are those additional restrictions, the state requires that only 15 family members be a part of that entity. So if you are about to go over that, you need to start having conversations of how are we going to handle this moving forward. Not only do we need to make sure we're filing our compliance in that way, but we need to remain compliant as far as state code goes. We've also seen where families decide to sell a piece of land. Well, the statute also requires that the farming entity either own or lease land. So again, there's a lot of compliance that can be triggered, or if you fall out of compliance, a lot of issues that can be triggered with that as well that are unique to farming entities. So, yep.
So once an entity is created and has filed, what are some things that folks need to look out for as far as actual farm and ranch operations?
I think one of the biggest is oral contracts are not good for anyone. Everything should be written down. If you're having a lease, whether it's with your parents or the neighbors or your cousins or a third party, you need a written contract. That way, if any issues come up, there's at least a document that shows what the original agreement was. So we kind of started originally as write it down. So in farming and ranching, what do we see? Cattle agreements, lease agreements, those type of issues, but it's best to have it written down. The second, a lot of times we'll see where a parent wants to sell their assets to their son, daughter, whoever's farming. It will create a significant tax consequence of depreciation recapture when you sell the machinery and equipment. So they just want to lease it to the farming heir, saying they can lease it for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years it's theirs. They've in essence paid for it. Well, the IRS is very careful to look at what's called an operating lease versus what's called a capital lease. So capital lease is if the equipment's worth $100,000 and you pay me $10,000 a year for 10 years and it's your lease, you really bought it, you didn't lease it. And you're gonna have depreciation recapture and some tax consequences, as opposed to an operating lease where you would just pay a fair market value rent, but then at the end of the lease, you're gonna have to buy it out at fair market value. If you do the operating lease and the intent is the farming heir receive the assets, then once again, you have to coordinate with your will in case something happens during the lease, so that the one that's kind of leasing the property knows what's gonna happen if you pass away unexpectedly. So there's an operating lease issue, a capital lease issue, and again, you have to coordinate the type of assets or the type of documents that you have. We've seen where simple 50-50 ownership, maybe two brothers, maybe father farming heir own property 50-50. If there's a fight and they can no longer farm together, what's going to happen to that equipment? So there are agreements that you can write ahead of time as to who would get which pool of assets. I have some farmers that they farm together, two brothers as a partnership. They own their land individually, 50-50 in each of their names. If one of them passes away, we have an agreement that basically they'll flip a coin. The estate will get pool A assets, the survivor will get the pool B assets, and they set new values each year depending on land values and maybe readjust the pools, but it's a way to address it so their spouses and their children don't have to fight about those issues down the road. So again, it's what type of agreement, what's going to happen down the road kind of operationally that we look at.
Yeah, I think, with any business, we talk a lot about down the road, like Marshall is talking about. And the Marshall also just kind of brought up oral contracts. They may technically be legally binding, but if we don't have evidence of that, it's going to cause a fight. And the unfortunate reality of it is families do fight. And when we start hitting these large sums of money, a lot of land, families fight over this stuff. So the best thing we can do up front is have written contracts and have governing documents that lay out how we handle this issue versus that issue. So that is something we work through with a lot of clients as far as, death, disability, divorce, those are definitely the big three, but there's a lot of other things that come into play. So,
anything else on the operation-specific side of things, gentlemen? Or if not, we'll move on to documentation, I guess. And talk about a little bit about what do families need and how often are they reviewing or updating like your governance documents?
Yeah, governance documents, they're kind of boring to look at. There are a lot of things you read in them, kind of you think, we're not going to use this, why are we even including this? But again, we're thinking 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future. We want to be updating those. I mean, we like to say annually. The reality is a lot of people aren't doing that, but we'll probably try to bug you and get you to update those or at least review them. A lot of times what we tell clients as well, especially when we have some of these farming entities that are carrying on for decades, if the operating agreement or the governing documents don't work for you right now, well, let's get together and we can amend them. We can change them so they do work for what your operations look like today. So, and you don't want to be stuck with something that was written 15 years ago that no longer applies. So any type of change, families growing, the land is growing, anything like that, we want to sit down and say, do these documents still work for us today?
Yeah, I think I'd just add on the documentation, a lot of the clients, if they're a single member or a one shareholder corporation, don't want to do the annual corporate minutes, the annual shareholder minutes, board of director minutes. They say it's just me, but it's important even if you're a sole shareholder to do the documents. If you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, the IRS could ignore the entity and say you're not following the corporate rules. We're going to treat you as though you're not a corporation. People ask me on the corporate minutes, I think it's number 3 on the checklist when I was a CPA that they want to see your last 3-year corporate minutes. So when you come in for an IRS audit, they're going to look at the returns, your articles of incorporation, they're going to want to see your bylaws, and they want to make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's, and part of that is doing those corporate minutes. And I know you can say, I'm the president, I'm the vice president, I'm the secretary, I'm the treasurer. It doesn't matter, but it does when you come under audit with the IRS. So it's important to have those done and done timely. I think Casey mentioned things becoming outdated. A lot of buy-sell agreements provide that the shareholders will set a price for the stock annually, maybe semi-annually, depending on changes. But if you don't set a price for 5 or 10 years, and that's outdated, what's going to happen? A lot of buy-sells have a formula price that will come into play if you don't set one, but that formula also needs to be reviewed. Like I say, you look at the value of machinery, you look at value of equipment, you look at the value of land. There are a lot of issues that those numbers, once they're outdated, will not have the effect that you want with the buy-sell. I've had some clients that just use a trade name with no supporting documents between them, maybe their siblings, maybe their cousins. Is that a partnership? The rules for the IRS is an association of 2 or more individuals that carry on a business as co-owners for profit. Can we argue you really are a partnership? Or if you're a partnership, why aren't you filing a partnership tax return? So there are different rules there. If it comes to leasing of equipment and you're going to split up, if the lease is only in one person's name, not the other, but it's showing 50-50 on your depreciation list, who owns that? How is that going to be treated? So having documentation, just the leases with an entity, again, what are the values, what's being leased, what's happening. So we want to be very careful. And I think the last one, we had a question earlier about the common paymaster rules. If you have two related corporations and you're sharing employees, maybe they're doing trucking for the LLC, but they're also working on the farm driving machinery and equipment, one of the entities can pay them and be responsible for all the payroll taxes, the withholding taxes. But withholding taxes are a personal liability. Even if you're incorporated, the individual shareholders or anyone that can sign on the checkbook is personally responsible for those. So if the other entity does not withhold and you're under a common paymaster, you're personally responsible for those unpaid taxes. So again, related entities shouldn't be an issue, but if you have different people in the two entities, that could come up. You need to document that agreement so you aren't paying someone else's tax liability.
Speaking of tax liability, we kind of want to close with a segment here in regard to taxation and maybe talk through with us a little bit, Marshall, the issues to consider when forming an entity, and then what are some of the either the tax benefits or maybe the consequences in having formed it.
Well, I think first, whenever you discuss the taxation, it's nice to get together in kind of a group, both with the attorney and with the CPA, and then with the family members that are involved. The CPAs will know the business from the tax standpoint. The attorneys know it more from the legal responsibility standpoint. But you know, when you're setting up a corporation, they're easy to create. They're at a lower tax rate when in operations than an individual. But there are some real issues with the corporation that you have to look at. One, whenever you take assets out of the corporation, it's treated as though the corporation sold it. So you're going to have depreciation recapture and ordinary income. So if you put a piece of equipment into a corporation, now you want to take it out, even though you own 100% of the corporation and you're putting it in your personal name, you will have a tax consequence when you take that out. If you liquidate the corporation, you'd have a tax consequence both in the corporation and to you individually. So one of the negatives about a corporation is often known as double taxation. So once in the corporate level and then again at the individual level. So unless you're going to pass a corporation on to future generations, there's a lot of tax planning that has to go into how are you going to liquidate that entity in the most tax advantageous manner. Other than corporations, there are the pass-through entities, a partnership, an LLC taxed as a partnership, or what's called a subchapter S corporation. Those entities do not pay any income tax, but the income flows through to the individual owners. And that can create issues, what we call phantom income. So if your entity had gross income of, let's say, $100,000, you have tax deductible expenses of $70,000, so you have a taxable income of $30,000. If there are three owners that are equal, that comes out $10,000 to each owner, and they have to pay the income tax on that money, even though they didn't receive the cash. The cash could have remained in the entity. It could be used for buying more equipment, maybe saving up for a rainy day fund. A lot of reasons that could be in there, but this phantom income can cause problems when you're getting what's called a Schedule K-1 out of the entity saying you need to pay tax and the entity has not distributed the funds. So it's kind of taxation without the cash is what we look at. So again, you have to be aware of that. Some documents put in that the entity will distribute at least 20% of the net income figure to at least help take some of the bite out of the tax rate that you are in. Also in a corporation, there are no capital gains rates. When you think as an individual and you have investments, you have a lower capital gain rate but a higher rate on ordinary income. In a corporation, if you're holding liquid investments, maybe you've sold some assets and you're on cash and you think you're going to get a capital gains rate, you're not. Everything's taxed at the corporate rate. So there's some issues there. We have to look at, again, what the plans are for the entity down the road. For a few years now, there's no like-kind exchange for equipment. So when you trade in some equipment, get new equipment, technically you have a gain on what you traded in. It's probably been fully depreciated, so you're going to have some gain. If you're not replacing it, you could be stuck with that gain. If you replace it, I think the new big beautiful bill extended the Section 179 expensing and the bonus depreciation expensing. So hopefully with the depreciation, you can use that to offset the new purchase. But again, if you're getting out, you're not going to replace that machinery and equipment, then you're going to have some tax issues. I think the last one, there were some issues I've seen with kind of using a limited partnership or a limited liability partnership, because we've done where distributions to a limited partner or a limited liability partner are not subject to self-employment tax. So if you're just a general partnership, but you have some people that really aren't involved in the operations and they're willing just to be a limited partner, we can save some self-employment tax by converting that entity as well. So again, there are a lot of different tax components that go into each specific entity. We don't have time to go through the entire tax code today.
Thankfully.
So.
Thank you for your time, gentlemen. Anything we missed at all, I guess? Any of the subject matter that we covered here? Is there anything that we...
No, but parting words, document everything, I think.
Yeah.
I'd say document everything, and we were speaking a little earlier, I think the artificial intelligence and what you can do on your own will be greatly enhanced going forward, but you don't know what you don't know. And that can cause some issues down the road, so it's still very much worthwhile at this point to have some experts involved from the beginning to get you set up correctly.
Yeah, great comments. Casey, Marshall, thank you so much for your time. How do people get in touch with you, I guess, if they want to follow up with you on some of this information through the website here or phone number, anything that you have, if you have that handy now for Ohnstad Twichell?
Yeah, but there would be our names on the website, and then Ohnstad Twichell or OhnstadLaw.com. Yep. And then the telephone number is 701-282-3249. So you can reach all of us at that number.
Sounds great. Thank you once again, gentlemen. And thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll tune in again, be able to check out the next video in this series.